All around me, glasses of champagne plinked, the crystal ringing seeming to echo the pulse in my temples, and my sister Vanessa's voice echoed through the reception room, filling it with that special sweetness that could cut glass, as if this were not a bridesmaid's speech but a carefully crafted assault on the senses, cold, precise, and adorned with pearls of schadenfreude. The laughter that followed, loud, genuine, or rather, carefully rehearsed for the audience, felt like a slap in the face, ringing, humiliating, and I felt my cheeks flush with shame and pain as the nearly 200 wedding guests turned in unison, as if on cue, to look at Brandon and me, as if they had just witnessed something unworthy, something worth condemning or remembering. My name is Haley, and this day, this very day, should have been the happiest of my life, the kind of moment that people remember decades later with a thrill in their voice and a sparkle in their eyes, telling their grandchildren how it all happened, how it all began. I should have known that Vanessa would not allow my wedding to pass without her signature reminder, that same icy whisper through a smile, of my place in our carefully constructed family hierarchy, where her name, like a golden plaque, adorns the top, and mine is lost somewhere at the bottom. There she was, glowing in her designer bridesmaid dress, pale lavender, slinky, impeccably tailored, hosting the guests at the head table as if it were her night, her triumph, her applause, while I sat in my grandmother's repurposed wedding dress, painstakingly tailored by my mother and me over long evenings in the kitchen, the lace smelling of lavender and thyme, trying not to show the tears that were coming like a tide, slow but inexorable. Haley, honey, smile, my mother, Rossi, hissed beside me, her perfectly manicured fingers, pale pink polish and a ring that felt heavier than her approval, digging into my hand as if physical pain could stop the emotional one. People are watching, she added, her voice not alarming but warning. Of course they were watching. They'd been watching me my whole life, assessing, weighing, wondering which Blair's sister would stumble first. Spoiler. It was always going to be me. Under the table, Brandon's calloused hand found mine, warm and steady, like an anchor in this swirling sea of falsehood, and his thumb began to gently trace circles on my palm, a simple, almost childish gesture, but there was more love in it than in all the tinsel we'd been surrounded with. When I looked up at him, his brown eyes were calm, kind, unconcerned about what was happening around us, unwavering as ever. Let them laugh, he murmured, leaning in so close that his breath tickled my ear and reminded me that I wasn't alone. We know what we have. God, how I loved that man, even while he was covered in a thin layer of dust from the fields he'd been working that very morning, because, yes, he'd insisted on personally checking out the irrigation system on his farm before heading off to his own wedding. He was real, not ironed, not polished, not perfect, but real, and that made him stand out from the crowd of people in expensive suits and fake smiles just waiting for something to gossip about. I still can't believe you're marrying a farmer, my younger sister, Erin, whispered, sinking into the empty chair next to me. At 27, she was diplomatic, polite, trying to smooth things over, playing for both teams. I mean, I guess it's romantic, but Mom's been taking antacids all week, she added, with that expression that was supposed to be reassuring but only made me tense. Thank you for the pep talk, I said with a grin, watching Vanessa work the crowd like a Senate candidate, leaning in, laughing, touching shoulders, creating the illusion of intimacy. At 31, she had mastered the art of being a golden child, corner office, MBA from Stanford, husband who wore suits more expensive than our farm and could talk for hours about market volatility even when no one asked. That's not what I meant, Erin quickly added, but her words were cut off when my father, Donald, spoke loudly and confidently, as if coming from a lectern, cutting through the chatter of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he stood at the podium, his silver hair neatly coiffed, his expression somewhere between pride, humility, and a little disappointment, as if he had something important to say but hadn't gotten around to it. I'd like to say a few words about my daughter, Haley, he continued, and I felt my stomach clench into a tight knot. This couldn't be good. Haley has always been unique, he began, and I saw Vanessa grin openly behind her glass of champagne. While her sisters focused on their careers and achievements, he continued, pausing meaningfully, Haley chose a different path. An easier path. The word easier hung in the air like a death sentence. Brandon's grip tightened on my hand. She chose to marry Brandon, a man who works with his hands and understands the value of hard work, Donald continued, each word sounding not like a blessing but like an epitaph. We wish them happiness in their humble life together, he finished, and the audience applauded politely but feebly. I noticed my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, and honestly, I wasn't sure if they were tears of joy or mourning. Your father is exaggerating, Brandon said quietly, his voice calm, almost distant, despite everything that was packed into the words, like poison hidden in sugar. He's been rehearsing this speech for weeks, I whispered back, watching as Vanessa leaned toward her husband, Dustin, to whisper something, and they both immediately burst into laughter, and I didn't need to hear what they were saying to know they were laughing at me. This was my family, the people who should have been there to share my joy, and instead they were treating my wedding like a funeral for my potential. Every accomplishment I'd ever earned, my college degree, my teaching awards, my small organic food business, it all seemed to fade in their eyes because I'd chosen love over status. You know what? I said, standing up so abruptly that my chair skidded across the floor with a loud scrape. The sound cut through the chatter of the reception, and suddenly, as if on cue, everyone was turning to look at me again. I raised my glass of water, because of course I was too practical to waste good champagne on a toast, especially one that wasn't meant for celebration but rather as an act of self-preservation, and looked straight at my sister, not looking away, giving her no doubt that these words were addressed to her. To family, I said, clearly, so even the furthest guest at the farthest table could hear, and to knowing who really has your back when it matters, I added, letting my voice firm on the last words, because if I was going to speak out loud, I wanted everyone in this room to hear not just the sound, but the meaning between the lines. Vanessa's smile faltered, just a little, maybe a split second, but I noticed it because I knew her too well, because I'd spent my life studying her reactions like it was the only textbook I'd been allowed to study from, but she recovered quickly, professionally, as befitted a woman whose face had once appeared in mutual fund commercials, raising her glass with the others who surrounded her as if nothing had happened. The toast was a line drawn in the sand, thin but indelible, even if none of the guests might have noticed. And I knew, one glance at their faces, at the cold glasses in their hands, someone had noticed. And as I sat back down, Brandon leaned toward me, his lips barely touching my cheek, and whispered, "That's my girl," with such gentle pride that for a second the hubbub around me seemed to dissolve into background, unimportant. I didn't know then how prophetic his words would prove. 3 years later, I stood in Vanessa's marble foyer, cool and shiny and echoing like a museum where every object is part of a carefully curated display, holding a saucepan we'd bought on sale at a local store that probably cost less than the doormat. The annual Blair family barbecue was in full swing, an event scheduled down to the minute like a corporate meeting, and I could already hear the familiar soundtrack of my childhood, the clinking of glasses, the forced laughter, the understated compliments that always had a hint of superiority hidden behind them, carefully disguised as small talk. "Haley," my mother's voice rang out as I stepped onto the pristine deck, as if she'd been counting the time of my arrival. "That's it. We were just talking about the house in the Hamptons that Dustin bought." "Of course he did." Vanessa, gliding across the deck in a white flowing sundress, light and airy but no doubt costing more than my monthly grocery budget, approached with that same smile she seemed to have practiced in the mirror, as well groomed as her perfect landscape outside. "Oh, you brought food," she said, her gaze sliding over my pan as if I'd brought something less than a treat than something questionable, possibly dangerous. "How thoughtful," she added, and I could almost hear the invisible air quotes tightening around her words. "Green bean casserole," I said, trying not to be too polite, and set the dish down on the long catering table, next to the professionally prepared delicacies from the garden she was rumored to visit only with a glass of Prosecco in hand. "Is it organic?" Dustin appeared next to his wife, his martini swinging gently in his hand, his crisp polo seeming to glow. "Or just plain food?" The question hung in the air, as if it were challenging not just my recipe but my life, my choices. I felt a familiar heat creep up my neck, starting to climb my spine. "It's homemade," Brandon said quietly, coming up to me, his voice simple, even, requiring no explanation. His jeans were clean but threadbare, his shirt a plain cotton, and next to all this designer splendor, he looked like he'd stepped into this place from another time, another world. Right, Dustin nodded, with that theatrical condescension that made even friendly words sound sharp. "Farming. How are you?" "Still, playing in the dirt?" "We're doing well," I said, keeping my voice steady with difficulty. The farm had been profitable for 2 years in a row, despite the drought, rising prices, and logistical difficulties. Profitable? Oh, honey, that's sweet, Vanessa laughed, and her laugh was like wind chimes in a hurricane. Clear, yes, but not reassuring. Dustin just closed a deal worth what's probably more than your small farm has made in a decade. Actually, my father interjected, coming over with his bourbon, his footsteps echoing on the stone patio. I was going to ask about that. This farming endeavor of yours, when do you plan on doing something more substantial with your life? Donald, my mother warned, but her tone wasn't stern, more politely enveloping, as if she wanted to hear the answer to that question, too. We're happy, Brandon said simply. It's a good job. An honest job. An honest job, Dustin repeated, as if he were tasting the words as he stirred his martini. That's one way of saying it. Though I have to say, watching you two at family events is like watching a nature documentary. Here are simple farmers in their natural habitat. Laughter rang out around us, dry and hollow, like a signal of approval. I saw Erin turn her head across the patio, but she said nothing. At least we sleep well at night, I said before I could stop myself. The laughter died down. Dustin's smile became taut, like a thin wire. What's that supposed to mean? Vanessa asked, her voice ringing, sharp enough to cut glass. Nothing, I said quickly. It's just that physical work gets tiring. But the damage had already been done. I'd crossed some invisible line that no one had pointed out but that everyone suddenly felt. Well, my mother said, with forced cheerfulness, trying to change the subject, who wants to see the new pool house? The group broke apart like waves leaving the eye of a storm, following Vanessa toward the latest addition to her personal real estate empire. I took a step to follow them, but Brandon squeezed my hand. I'm going to check the truck, he said. Make sure the windows aren't left open. I knew he just needed air. These meetings had been hard on him, probably harder than they had been on me, watching his wife being torn apart by her own family and being unable to do anything about it. I'll come with you, I said, already taking a step away, but Brandon shook his head with that gentle, quiet confidence he always used to make a point without raising his voice. Stay. Enjoy your family, and the word enjoy, pronounced with a light, almost imperceptible irony, sounded like a code understood only by the two of us, like a reminder that this place, this holiday, this family, were a test for me, not a consolation, and that he, seeing this, wanted to protect me, at least give me a chance to gather my courage. So I found myself alone by the pool, where the sun, carelessly reflecting off the blue water, playfully scattered glare on the tiles and glass, reminding me that even beautiful things can be artificial, because I knew that the maintenance of this water probably cost more than Brandon and I spend on food in a month. The laughter was coming from deeper in the grounds, somewhere on the tour of the brand new pool house, and in that cheerful but distant hum there was a familiar note, a note I'd lived with all my life, what it was like to watch from the outside, to be invited but not included, to be a part and yet not included, always a little off, always just a little short. They're being awful today, Erin said, coming toward me, handing me one of their glasses of wine. Today, I thought. And I took the glass. It's only Tuesday for them, I said, allowing myself a sip that might have cost less than the word I'd spoken. It's not always like that, is it? I turned to her, feeling a quiet, hard-won irritation rise up in me. When was the last time someone in this family asked about my life without making a joke out of it? Erin froze, as if that simple sentence had sentenced her, and for a moment her expression became vulnerable, real. Things have been tense lately, she said finally, as if that explained everything. Because of Dustin's job. I mean, tomorrow was tense. Tense about what? I asked, and my voice, though still soft, had a sharp edge. I guess I shouldn't say anything, Erin whispered, as if someone were actually watching us. She glanced around, then leaned closer. Some of his investments aren't going well. Big ones. Vanessa made comments about the need to rethink his lifestyle. Before I could process her words, Vanessa's voice came from the back of the terrace, as it always did at the worst possible moment, sharp and commanding, like a taut string being struck. Haley, come settle this argument. I returned to the group, feeling the weight of something more than wine in my glass, something that needed to be worn like armor. We were just discussing career paths, Vanessa said, with that predatory smile that always preceded a public execution. And I was telling everyone how you really found your calling. I mean, not everyone can handle the intellectual demands of what you call it. Subsistence farming. Laughter rolled over their heads, dry, a little nervous, the way it does when people laugh not because it's funny but because they don't know how else to respond. I have to ask, though, she went on, taking a step closer, her voice a little lower, a little more intimate, but all the more dangerous. Have you ever wondered what you could have achieved if you'd really tried? I mean, not settled for this weird little life, but gone all the way. Her words hit me like blows, not with hands, but more accurately than any physical harm. Every sound was not just criticism but a polished mockery, as if she had carefully collected all my insecurities over the years only to lay them out before me on this day, in this moment, like a showcase of failure. I opened my mouth to respond, but Vanessa didn't give me the chance. Tomorrow isn't over yet, she continued. I'm just saying that some of us dream bigger than gardens and fairs. Real life happens on Wall Street, not in that little bubble you've created around yourself. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Even those who had just been laughing now looked uncomfortable, as if they suddenly realized the line had been crossed. I set my wine glass down on the table with a steady hand. You're right, I said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Real life happens. And sometimes it happens in ways you never expect. 6 months after the barbecue from hell, I first noticed the cracks beginning to appear, subtle, almost imperceptible at first, like the slight crunch of your feet on a winter lake. It started with missed calls. My parents, who used to call every week with yet another update on Vanessa's accomplishments, suddenly went silent. And when I did get through, the conversation seemed strained, like they were reading from a script with important pages missing. How's Vanessa doing? I asked during one particularly awkward conversation with my mom. Oh, you know, Vanessa. Always busy, always working on something big. The pause that followed was so long you could have driven a truck through it. What about Dustin? Is he okay? Listen, honey. I have to run. Your dad's calling. Click. Beeps. I stared at the phone, frowning. In 30 years, my mother had never interrupted a conversation unless someone was bleeding on the floor. This was the first real red flag. The second had come at Aaron's birthday dinner. We met at a small Italian restaurant downtown, a place modest enough to immediately arouse suspicion. The Blair family did nothing modestly. Where is everyone else? I asked as Aaron slid into the booth across from Brandon and me. Something happened with Mom and Dad. Vanessa and Dustin are doing work. Work on a Saturday night? I asked, raising an eyebrow slightly. Erin picked at her breadstick, avoiding my gaze. Things have been complicated lately. How complicated? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. What's going on, Erin? She glanced around the restaurant, as if expecting a microphone hidden somewhere under the table, then lowered her voice. Dustin's company is in trouble. Serious trouble. Some investment scheme gone awry. I felt a slight stirring in my chest, not quite satisfaction, not exactly gloating or joy, but something vague and hot that felt like a mixture of relief and ingrained resentment, like the first breath after a long dive into ice water. I pushed it down, almost scared of myself, ashamed of the part of me that had been expecting this weakness from Vanessa, as if everything inside me had been built up for years to falter at just this moment. How bad? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral, but not too neutral, lest I betray the same anxiety. So bad, Erin said, taking a sip of wine, that they had to put the house in the Hamptons up for sale. And the boat. Anne. Vanessa's calling relatives, asking for short-term loans. The excitement grew, brighter this time, bolder, like a flame given air. I sipped some water, as if it would cool my face, hide the reaction, smooth out the inner tremor. Have they asked you for money? Brandon asked quietly, not looking up from the napkin he was mechanically folding in his hands. Not yet, I said, glancing at Erin, but I think that's only because I have nothing to give. Erin finally met my gaze, and there was something painfully honest in her eyes, like someone who'd kept a secret for far too long. They didn't call you, did they? No, I said. Then again, we're just farmers. What do we know about real money? Erin winced, as if she'd tasted something better. You've heard of that? Of course. I smiled without joy. I was there, remember? Front row at the Tomorrow show. She'd been different lately. Tense. Snappy at everyone. Even the golden child has bad days, I guess. We ate in relative silence after that, but I could feel Brandon watching me, not with his eyes but with something deeper, knowing how my mind worked, how my thoughts wove, the wheels turning inside me, molding an answer, a reaction, a decision. Later that week, we were harvesting late summer tomatoes, and just then, with my arms buried in leaves and sap, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hi, Haley. Her voice was shaky and older than I remembered. This is your mom. Mom? Are you okay? You sound. I'm okay, honey. Just tired. Look, I wanted to ask. Could you come over to our house this weekend? We have some things we need to discuss as a family. That word, family, always made my tongue feel colder than warm, because in Blair parlance, family discussion almost never meant good news. What? It's better if we talk in person. Can you come over Saturday, around 2 o'clock? I glanced at Brandon, who was pretending not to eavesdrop as he loaded boxes of tomatoes into the truck. His shoulders were tense, straight, the way he held himself when he knew there was a storm ahead. I think so. Should I get you anything? Sure. Just me and Brandon. The line went dead, and I was left staring at the phone, as if it could bring back what was already gone. A family meeting? Brandon asked, not looking up. Looks like it. I nodded. About what? He sat up straighter, wiping his hands on his jeans. She didn't say. But given what Erin told us, they're going to ask us for money. It wasn't a question. We both knew. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as Brandon's breathing grew even and calm next to me, and I felt the wave of emotion coming at me, layer after layer. Part of me, more than I'd like to admit, was almost thrilled, because after all these years of them looking down on me as a mistake, a deviation from their path, now they finally wanted something from me. The irony was too pure, too beautiful, to miss. All these years, all their taunts about the simple life, the dirty garden, and here they were, asking for a farm girl whose loves and choices they'd considered failures for decades. But there was another part of me, the part that hadn't grown up, the part that still remembered being 7 and looking at Vanessa with hope, begging to be included in her games, and how the rejections were sweetly stinging. That part still wanted to be needed. And it hurt. Saturday morning was gray and rainy, as if the sky shared my feelings. Brandon was unusually quiet, his hands relaxed on the wheel, but I could see in his jaw that he was clenching his teeth. Whatever they ask, he said as we pulled into the familiar driveway, remember, you don't owe them anything. I know. Do you? I asked, and he turned to me. Because you have a good heart, Haley. And they know how to use that against you. I looked at the house I'd grown up in, with its neat lawn, its symmetrical shutters, a house that had seemed grand, almost a palace, when I was a child, but now seemed smaller, simpler, less real. I'll be okay, I whispered, more to myself than to him. We were climbing the steps when my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. Emergency family meeting. Please come. We need you. It was from Vanessa. Vanessa, who had spent years telling me I was worthless, that my dreams were fantasies for the lazy. Vanessa, who was now asking me for help. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, gritting my teeth. I rang the doorbell. My heart was pounding like it wanted to escape. It was time to see what real life looked like when it knocked on a farm girl's door. The living room felt like a courtroom when we walked in. Everyone was already there, arranged in a semicircle, not by chance, not just because. It was a carefully planned arrangement. My parents were sitting on the couch, their faces looking tired, older, and at that age, faces don't hide anything. Vanessa was perched on the edge of a chair, her designer blouse rumpled, her makeup uneven, and cracks were starting to show at the edges of her usual icy composure. Dustin was standing by the window, his back to us, his hands deep in his pockets, as if shoving them far enough would hide him from the world. Only Aaron looked truly uncomfortable, slouched on a small ottoman, avoiding my eyes and shooting me a quick, apologetic glance. "Haley, Brandon," my father said, gesturing toward two chairs that had clearly been set out ahead of time. "Thank you for coming." We sat down, and I immediately felt like I was in court, not because someone had announced the charges out loud, but because the looks we received said it all. This was not an invitation, this was a subpoena. The air in the room was thick, almost sticky, like the air before a thunderstorm, and everyone sitting in front of us seemed to be both prosecutor and juror. "So," I said, breaking the heavy, oppressive silence that had lasted since we entered. "What is this?" My mother twirled her wedding ring on her finger, a gesture I remembered from the times I'd looked up at her, sitting on the carpet with a doll in my hands, wondering why adults talked so much and said nothing. "We wanted to talk to you about a family situation," she finally said, her voice shaking. "What situation?" I asked, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to hear the truth from them, without playing, without disguise. Dustin finally turned away from the window, and I was shocked, not by his words, not by his gestures, but by his face. There was no trace of the previous confidence, only some kind of hard, internally burned anger, hidden behind the shadow of despair. "Stop pretending, Haley," he barked, and there was weariness in his voice. "You know exactly what situation you're in." "Dustin," Vanessa intervened, but even in her voice there was no longer the same steely authority, only something taut, like a thin thread about to break. "No," he cut him off. "I'm not going to pretend anymore. Your sister told you about our problems, didn't she? About the investments?" I glanced at Erin, but she was just staring at her hands, as if trying to read answers in the lines that weren't there. "She mentioned that you'd been going through some difficulties," I answered carefully. "Difficulties?" Dustin laughed, and it was bitter, like old wine gone sour in the bottle. "That's one way to put it." "What Dustin means," my father interjected, his voice level as a man who'd rehearsed this line many times, "is that the family has been through financial difficulties. Significant ones." "How significant?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a candle just snuffed out. Finally, my mother spoke. "We could lose everything." The words hit the room with the force of someone throwing open a window and letting in a cold wind. Suspicion was one thing, but hearing it like that, bluntly, without embellishment, was another. "Everything?" Brandon asked quietly. "The house, the savings, the retirement accounts?" "Yes," my father said, no longer turning away. "Dustin made some investments, on our behalf. Investments that didn't work out." I looked at Dustin, and he was looking right at me, not looking away, as if all of this, his failure, their failure, was somehow my fault. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said slowly, choosing my words as if they were fragile glass balls. "But I'm not sure why you're telling us this." "Because we need your help," Vanessa said, leaning forward, and for the first time in my life I saw in her eyes something that wasn't superior or condescending, but something that might have been desperation. "Our help?" I asked. "Your land," my father said bluntly. "The farm. We need you to sell it." The words hit me like a slap, and in that moment I realized that this hadn't been an accident, not an impulsive act, it had been planned. "Excuse me?" "It's the only asset in the family that isn't caught up in the mess," my mother added, her voice pleading. "If you sell the farm, we can pay off the debts and start over." I felt Brandon's hand find mine, his grip firm and warm, as if he knew that right now I needed not a solution, but support. "You want us to sell our house," I said slowly. "To fix your mistakes." "It's not about mistakes," Dustin raised his voice. It's about family. About doing what's right. What's right? My words came out harsher than I expected. Right is asking your family to sacrifice everything they've worked for. You worked, Vanessa said, standing, her face shaking. You're playing house on a patch of dirt. This is real life. Real consequences. Real consequences for the choices you've made. We're family, Mom cried, tears streaming down her cheeks like rain on glass. Family helps family. Where was this family help when you spent years making fun of everything Brandon and I built? I stood up, too, my hands shaking, but my voice steady. Where was she when you treated him like dirt under your boots? It's not fair, Dad said, but there was no strength in his voice. Really? You want to talk about fairness? Let's talk about every family dinner where you treated us like we were a charity project. Every comment about our simple little life. Every look of shame, like we were a stain on your reputation. Haley, Aaron began, but I couldn't stop. And now that everything is falling apart, your golden boy has failed, you suddenly remember that we exist. What if we are family? This isn't about the past, Vanessa said desperately. This is about the present. About survival. Your survival requires our sacrifice, I said, and every word was like a nail. It's just dirt. Dustin exploded. Dirt and weeds. It's nothing. You can buy another farm anywhere. The silence that followed was so thick it felt like it was clinging to his throat. Even he seemed to realize he'd gone too far. Brandon stood up slowly, reservedly, but his posture conveyed everything he didn't say. I think, he said quietly, we should leave. Wait, Mom pleaded. Please, just think about it. We're not asking for a decision now. Actually, Dad said, his voice as hard as stone now. We are. The creditors won't wait long. We need an answer by Monday. Monday? I stared at him, disbelieving. You're giving us 2 days to decide whether to ruin our lives, for you? You're being dramatic, Vanessa said, but her voice was shaking, and that telltale shaking revealed more about her than she might have wanted to admit. Fear, confusion, the knowledge that the situation was out of control, that her usual grip on what was happening was melting away like sugar on the tongue. This is just property. We're talking about people's lives here. My daughter's future. What about our future? I asked, feeling something heavy and ancient simmering inside me, as if Vanessa's words had pressed some deep, painful button. You don't have children, she countered, and those 4 words hit me with unexpected force, as if someone had clenched a fist around my heart and squeezed it mercilessly. You don't understand what's at stake. The words hung in the air, sharp, the unspoken implication that our childless marriage had somehow devalued our lives like a thorn driven deep, and I saw Brandon's jaw tighten and his hands curl into fists, as if he were holding back the urge to say everything he thought about her, about them, about the unfairness with which we had been judged our entire lives. We're leaving, I said, grabbing my purse with such determination that even the chair creaked from the abruptness of my movement. Haley, please, my mother called as we headed for the door, her voice shaking, not from tears but from fear. Just think about it. Please. I turned around, taking one last look at these people who shared my DNA but not my soul, people who were called family but felt like strangers. I'll think about it, I said. But you have to think about something, too. You have to think about the kind of people who asked their family to lose everything to save them from their own mistakes. As we walked to the truck, my father's voice reached us like a dull rumble of thunder behind us. You'll come to your senses when you realize what you owe us, Haley. For everything we've done for you over the years. Brandon's hand was already on the truck door, but he paused, his knuckles white with tension, gripping the metal like he wanted to push it in. What do we owe them? I said loud enough for everyone to hear. After 30 years of being treated like the disappointment of the family? What exactly do we owe them? No one could answer. Or rather, no one dared say it out loud. Their silence was everything. The drive home was almost silent, save for the crunch of gravel under the tires and the slight creak of the seats. Brandon's knuckles were still white on the steering wheel, and I could practically feel the anger surging off him in waves, quiet but powerful. We pulled into the driveway and I stared at our farmhouse, modest but beloved, as rooted in the land as we were, and in that moment I realized, this was the place my family had wanted us to give up without regret, as if it meant nothing. But the evening light, falling like golden ribbons across the fields, made everything so peaceful, so right, so real, that I could hardly keep from crying. Everything I'd ever wanted was right here. "I need to show you something," Brandon said as we climbed out of the truck. "Brandon, I'm not selling," I said immediately, sharply, with a fervor that needed no explanation. "I don't care what they—" "I know you're not selling," he interrupted. "That's not the point." He headed toward the barn with a quick, determined stride, and I followed, confused, feeling my insides twist with a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. "There are things I should have told you years ago." "What things?" I asked, but he said nothing, just opened the door to the barn and headed toward the back, where he had his little office. I'd been there many times, but he walked past the desk and went to an old filing cabinet in the corner that I'd never seen open before. "Sit down," he said, pulling out a thick manila folder, so stuffed the edges were starting to come apart. "Brandon, you're scaring me." "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to show you who we really are." He opened the folder, revealing papers spread out on the table, legal documents, patents, reports with numbers that made my head spin. "What are these?" "This," he pointed to one of the documents, "is a patent for the irrigation system we use in Northfield. The same one I built from old parts. I filed for a patent 3 years ago. It's now used on farms all over the Midwest." I read the headline, "Patent issued to Peyton Stone for improved precision farming system." He pulled out another document. "It's soil analysis software. It helps you know exactly when and where to plant. Not just by intuition, but scientifically. We can predict yields to within a few percent." I watched him lay out patent after patent, technical report after technical report, his name on each one. And my heart was pounding like crazy. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to be sure. I wanted to build something real before I started talking about it." He sat down across from me, looking at me with all the seriousness I loved about him. "Haley, this piece of land we have here isn't just a farm. It's a research and development facility. Everything we grow here, every system we test, it's all part of something bigger." My head was spinning. "How much bigger?" He pulled out a financial report and placed it on the table. The numbers at the bottom made me blink, certain I'd misread them, because there was a story behind those contracts and numbers. "Should we join?" Brandon asked, and I heard it as more than a question, an invitation into a world I hadn't even considered. "It's worth it." "Stone farming," he paused, and in the silence I could already picture hundreds of farms, future projects. "I started this 5 years ago, right after we got married. Used our land as a testing ground for everything." I looked at the papers, then at my husband. "All this time." "You were running a tech company," I breathed out. "A very quiet tech company. Most of our customers don't even know where the innovation comes from. They just know the system works. But why keep it a secret? Why does my family think we're just farmers?" Brandon paused for a moment, carefully stacking the papers. "Because I wanted to see who they really were," he finally said, evenly and honestly. "I wanted to see how they would treat us when they decided we had nothing to offer them." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't believe he actually knew how they viewed us and just let it happen. "Yeah," I breathed. Even though I suffered at every family reunion, thinking we were the poor relations. "Haley, do you have any idea how that felt? Sitting there while they mocked what we'd built, thinking maybe they were right. Maybe I'd wasted my life." Brandon reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "You let me doubt myself. While you sat through all of that, you let me think we were struggling. We never had problems. Our bills were always paid. We never wanted for anything." "That's not the point," I said quietly, standing and walking to the window, as if there might be an answer there, beyond the glass. The point is, you made me feel worthless. You let them make me feel worthless. I never wanted that. But you let them. A heavy silence fell between us, holding years of unspoken truths. And that's not all, he said quietly. I turned. More than what? He pulled out a second roll of papers from the folder. Dustin's company. The investment that failed. Brandon pulled out another folder. What do you mean? I asked, confused. He bet against us, against Stone Agricultural Technologies, your farm. He removed the coin from the table and put the papers down. He shorted our stock, betting his clients' money, including your parents' pension fund, that our company would fail. I sat back in my chair, my heart clenching. The picture came to me. He'd lost everything on us failing. He was so convinced that anything to do with ordinary farmers was worthless that he'd bet everything on us failing. My phone vibrated loudly, a text from Aaron. They're coming to the farm tomorrow. All of them. Dad says they won't take no for an answer. I showed the text to Brandon. He read it and looked up at me, something new in his eyes, the anticipation of victory, perhaps. Good girl, he said quietly. Let them come. Okay, Brandon. They're going to demand that we sell everything. They're going to find out the truth. He stood up and began shoving the papers back into the folders, his movements slow, deliberate, like a man who'd been preparing for this moment for a long time. What are you planning? He looked at me, a quiet smile floating across his face like cold glass. I plan to give them exactly what they've been asking for all these years, a real education about who we are and what we're worth. And then what? I asked, not believing the words, but seeing something new in him, hard, calculating. Then we'll see if they're truly your family, or if they're just people with the same DNA. I looked at my husband. The quiet farmer I knew was still there, but inside him lived someone else, someone who was ready to shake up this whole web of hypocrisy. You've been planning this for a long time, haven't you? I asked, softly but firmly. I've been preparing for this, he said, and the words sounded like a death sentence. Is there a difference? He met my gaze, and for the first time, Brandon looked dangerous, real strength, contained and focused. I guess we'll find out tomorrow, he whispered. They came like a storm front. 3 cars pulled up to our house at exactly 2 o'clock, sending up clouds of dust that settled on their expensive paint. I watched from the kitchen window as they climbed out of the car, my parents looking grim, Vanessa clutching a leather briefcase, Dustin adjusting his tie as if he were heading to a boardroom rather than a farmhouse, and even little Tiffany, Vanessa's 8-year-old daughter, looking confused and out of place in her immaculate white dress, as if this was a meeting more for adults than for a child. The show is about to begin, Brandon said quietly, adjusting his plain button-down shirt, for he insisted on dressing as he always did, jeans, work boots, the same clothes that had earned him disdainful looks for years, but today they were a symbol of pride and integrity. The knock on our door was sharp and commanding, my father's, and I felt old wounds tighten in my chest. I opened the door to find them arranged like a delegation, my parents flanking Vanessa and Dustin, Aaron shuffling uncomfortably in the back, holding tightly to Tiffany. We need to talk, my father said without preamble. Come in, I invited, despite the tremor in my voice, stepping aside. They entered our living room, and I watched them take in the simple furniture, the handmade quilts, the family photos on the mantel, the same room they had been in dozens of times, but their gaze was different now, appraising, measuring everything not by the heart but by cost and benefit. Please sit, Brandon said, gesturing to the couch and chairs. We'd better stand, Dustin said, his voice tight with barely contained desperation. This won't take long. Actually, my dad said firmly, pulling out a folder. We brought paperwork to make this easier. He set it on our coffee table like he was handing us a subpoena, real estate sales papers. We've already had it appraised and found a buyer. All you have to do is sign. I stared at the papers, then at my family. You appraised our land without asking us. We're trying to be efficient, my mother said, her voice tight. Time is of the essence here. Whose time? Brandon asked softly. Don't play games, Dustin snapped. You know exactly what's at stake. Your parents could lose their house. Vanessa and I could lose everything. Tiffany could lose her college fund, her future. Dad, what's going on? Tiffany asked quietly, tugging at her father's sleeve. It's okay, honey, Vanessa said quickly. Adults are just talking. About what? About family? Mom asked, not taking her eyes off me. About how family takes care of each other. I felt the familiar guilt creeping up on me, the same thing that had controlled me my entire life. But then I looked at Brandon, who was watching the scene, and I saw something in him I hadn't seen before: resilience, an unwillingness to give in. You're right, he said suddenly. Family is supposed to look out for each other. My mother's face was filled with relief. Oh, thank God. I knew you'd understand, she said, almost out loud. That's why, Brandon continued, walking over to his desk in the corner. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about family. He pulled the same collection of papers I'd seen yesterday out of a manila folder and walked back into the living room. What is this? Vanessa eyed the folder suspiciously. Information? Brandon asked, sitting down in a chair. About who we really are, about what this piece of land really is. We don't have time to play, my father said impatiently. We need a solution. You're going to get one, Brandon continued, and I curled my fingers on the chair. But first, let me ask you something, Dustin. In his professional opinion, how much is this farm worth? Dustin looked around dismissively. Maybe $200,000, $300,000 if we're lucky. It's decent land, but not prime real estate, he said coolly, as if he were giving a dry review. Interesting estimate. Brandon opened the folder and pulled out a document. What if I told you, he paused, and even the faint sound of breathing in the room ceased, that this piece of land is actually the research and development headquarters for a $50 million company? The room went dead silent, as if there was a question hanging over us all, and only I dared to voice it. What? Vanessa said weakly. Stone Agricultural Technologies, Brandon continued calmly, and I saw the color in everyone's eyes change, because this was no longer about land, not about paperwork. This was about so much more, about how people who are dedicated to their dreams can be so much more than they seem at first glance. I watched from the kitchen window as they climbed out of the car, my parents looking grim, Vanessa clutching a leather briefcase, Dustin straightening his tie as if he were heading to a boardroom and not a farmhouse, and even little Tiffany, Vanessa's 8-year-old daughter, looking confused and out of place in her immaculate white dress, as if this meeting was too adult for her young heart. The show's about to begin, Brandon said quietly, adjusting the plain button-down shirt he insisted on wearing, as he always did, jeans and work boots, clothes that had earned him disdainful looks for years but that today were a symbol of honesty and strength. The knock on our door was sharp and decisive, my father's. I opened the door to find them arranged like a delegation, my parents flanking Vanessa and Dustin, Aaron hovering uncertainly in the back, holding Tiffany's hand. We need to talk, my father said. Come in, I said, stepping back. They walked into our living room, and I watched them study the simple furniture, the handmade quilts, the family photos on the mantel, the same room they'd been in dozens of times, but with a different look in their eyes now, judgmental, expectant, measuring everything in terms of loss and gain. Please, sit down, Brandon said, gesturing to the couch and chairs. We'd rather stand, Dustin said, his voice tight with barely contained desperation. This won't take long. Actually, Dad said, pulling out a folder. We brought the paperwork. He placed the real estate sales papers on the coffee table. We've already appraised it and found a buyer. All you have to do is sign. I stared at the papers and then at the family. You appraised our land without asking us. We're trying to be efficient, Mom said. Time is of the essence. Whose time? Brandon asked softly. Don't play games, Dustin interjected angrily. Your parents could lose their house. We could lose everything. Tiffany could lose her future. Dad, What's going on? Tiffany asked quietly. Nothing, honey, Vanessa answered. About the family? Mom asked. About how the family takes care of each other. Guilt crept up on me again. But I looked at Brandon. He was firm. You're right, he said suddenly. Family needs to take care of each other. Mom's face was filled with relief. Oh, thank God. I knew you'd understand. That's why, Brandon continued, it's time to have an honest conversation about family. He pulled out a manila folder of documents, the same one he'd picked up yesterday, and walked back into the room. What is this? Vanessa asked. Information about who we really are, Brandon said, sitting down. And what this piece of land is. We need a solution, Dad said impatiently. You'll get it, Brandon said. But first, Dustin, how much do you think this farm is worth? Maybe 200,000, 300,000, he said dismissively. It's good land, but it's not great. Brandon nodded and pulled out a document. What if I told you, he paused, that this property isn't just a farm, it's the headquarters of a $50 million research company? The room went dead silent. What? Vanessa said weakly. Stone Agricultural Technologies, Brandon said slowly. Maybe you've heard of it. Your husband certainly has. Dustin's face went white. That's impossible. Really? Brandon pulled out another document. Patent number 108473992, Advanced Precision Farming System. Invented by Brandon Stone, filed 3 years ago. Now licensed to farms in 12 states. He placed the patent next to the sales documents. Then another document, Predictive Soil Analysis Software, also licensed to farms across the country. Then another document. Should I continue? I have about 30 more patents here, all developed right here on this piece of land you called useless. Mom stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. I don't understand, she said quietly. It's simple, Brandon said. While you were looking down on us, we were building something big. But you're just farmers. Dad repeated quietly. I'm a farmer, Brandon said, who happens to have a PhD in agricultural engineering from MIT. And I'm the CEO of a company that has revolutionized the way food is grown in this country. Vanessa sank into the nearest chair. That can't be right. Oh, but it's true, he said calmly, pulling out a financial report. Want to see our quarterly earnings? The numbers made Dustin flinch. But wait, Brandon said, his voice hardening, there's more. Dustin, are you familiar with Stone Agricultural Technologies? I may have heard the name, he muttered. You didn't just hear it. You bet against us. You convinced your clients, including Haley's parents, to short our stock. The room went unbearably quiet. You lost your retirement money betting on us to fail, Brandon continued. You were so sure that anything involving ordinary farmers was worthless that you bet on our demise. Dustin's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The beautiful irony, Brandon said, standing up. You not only lost their money, you lost it to us. Every dollar you bet against Stone Agricultural Technologies went into our pockets as the stock doubled. Oh, my God, Aaron whispered. So when you ask us to sell our land to save you from our mistakes, Brandon continued, you're asking us to sacrifice our life's work to make up for the damage you've done. At that moment, the front door opened and a man in an expensive suit walked in confidently, as if he owned the place. Sorry we're late, he said, setting his briefcase on the table. The movement was precise, flawless. I'd like you to meet Leonard Wise, our attorney. Leonard smiled, looking around at the stunned faces. I assume you have questions. He opened his briefcase with surgical precision and laid the papers on the table. Dad's papers looked pathetic next to the official legal documents scattered across the coffee table. Let's start with the basics, Leonard said, adjusting his glasses. The property in question is wholly owned by Stone Agricultural Technologies, a corporation owned by Brandon and Haley Stone. No debt, mortgage, or liens. That's impossible, my father cried. We helped with the down payment, which was paid off in 18 months. I have the canceled checks, Leonard said softly, sliding the document across the table. My father stared at the paper as if he might bite it. Any attempt to force a sale through legal channels would be inadvisable, he continued. The property is protected by several agricultural conservation laws, and the research being conducted here is backed by federal grants. Federal grants, my mother whispered, staring at the papers as if they were someone else's writing. Oh, yes, Brandon said. The Department of Agriculture has shown great interest in our work. We are developing drought-tolerant systems that could revolutionize areas prone to climate change. Dustin finally managed to speak, but his voice was shaking. That's all very impressive, but it doesn't change the fact that we're a family and we need help. Family, I repeated, standing up, the word heavy in my mouth. Let's talk about family. I walked over to the fireplace and picked up a photograph from my college graduation. Remember that day? I graduated from Sonoma Lada University with a degree in environmental science. You know what you told me, Dad? I saw my father's face turn stony. Too bad it's not a real degree, like in business or law. You said you spent 4 years studying the earth and plants. I put the photograph down and picked up another one, from our wedding day, the day I tied the knot with the man I love with all my heart. At that wedding, you apologized to the guests for my poor choices. You told Aunt Margaret, I turned to Vanessa, that you hoped I'd come to my senses before it was too late. Haley, Mom began, her voice shaking. I'm not finished, I continued, holding back my shaking hands. At every family gathering for 5 years, you made me feel like I was a disappointment, that I'd settle for less. You felt like our life was a mistake. Vanessa burst into tears, mascara running down her cheeks. We didn't mean it that way. I turned to her. You meant every word. Vanessa, you called our life a joke. You said real life was on Wall Street, not on a farm. You ridiculed everything we'd built. But we didn't know, she sobbed. We didn't know about the company, or the money. And that's the point, I interrupted her. You didn't know and you didn't want to know. You only saw what you wanted, 2 farmers you could look down on. Leonard cleared his throat. If I may, we need to discuss one more matter, the financial losses your family has suffered. He pulled out a document. Stone Agricultural Technologies monitors short positions in our stock. We are required to report significant trades to the SEC. Dustin's face went even whiter. The trades were executed through Pinnacle Investment Group, where Mr. Olson is a senior partner. The total exposure was about $2.3 million, including the retirement accounts of 17 clients. 17 families? Brandon said quietly. 17 families trusted you with their life savings, and you bet everything on us failing. It was a given, Dustin said desperately. Ag tech startups fail 90% of the time. You probably at least did your homework before risking other people's money, Leonard interrupted. Did you visit the company? Review the patents? The management team? Silence. You haven't studied this, have you? You've decided that farming is useless, just like we have. We can sue, my father said suddenly. For damages, for losses. Leonard smiled, his smile was icy. Please do it. I'll gladly explain to the jury how your son-in-law lost your client's savings by betting against your daughter's company. The optics alone are worth something. What do you want from us? Vanessa asked, her voice breaking. I looked around the room, at the faces that were my blood but had never been considered part of my soul. My parents had made me feel worthless for 30 years, my sister had turned cruelty into a fine art form, and Dustin had gambled his future on arrogance. And then there was little Tiffany, 8 years old, sitting in the corner, watching her world crumble. I exhaled, looking up from my dad's papers. I want you to go, I said simply, my voice unexpectedly calm. I want you to walk out that door and never come back. Haley, please, Mom begged, her voice shaking. We're so sorry, we made mistakes, but we're family. No, I said. The word felt like freedom. That's not how family treats each other. Family doesn't belittle each other for years. Family doesn't come back when they need something. What about us? Vanessa asked, her voice shaking. What about Tiffany? Her future? I looked at my niece, an innocent child caught in the rubble of adult failures. Tiffany's future was never my responsibility. It was yours, and you lost it. Are you really going to let us lose everything? Dad asked, his pulse trembling. After everything we've done for you. I laughed, and the sound was sharp and harsh. What exactly have you done for me, Dad? I interrupted. Besides dragging me down for 30 years, telling me I wasn't good enough. He paused, unresponsive. The meeting is over, Brandon said, standing. Leonard, could you please escort our guests out? Wait. Vanessa cried, her voice breaking. You'll regret this, Haley. You'll regret turning your back on your family. When you're old and alone. I met my sister's gaze, feeling for the first time in my life that I wasn't afraid of her. You're right, I said quietly. I'll remember this day. The day I first stopped letting you define my worth. They walked out like mourners from a funeral, carrying their demands and rights. Through the window, I watched them drive away, leaving behind clouds of dust and absolute silence. For the first time in 30 years, I felt free. The music of silence was different, not empty, but full, as if life itself had held its breath and could finally exhale. Leonard packed his briefcase as methodically as he had unpacked it, each document in its place. Well, he said, clicking the locks shut. Everything went as expected. Have you done this before? I asked. Not exactly, he replied calmly, adjusting his tie, but I've seen enough family drama to know how it goes. People show their true colors when they're desperate. Your family showed theirs, and now you can move on without them. After Leonard left, Brandon and I sat on our porch, watching the sun set over the fields they'd called useless dirt hours before. Do you think I was too harsh? I asked, stroking the plain arm of the chair. Brandon was silent, his fingers tracing patterns in the wood. Then he said slowly, Do you remember what Vanessa said at our wedding about us, playing in the dirt? It's hard to forget, I nodded. I knew that day, he continued, that this moment would come sooner or later. Maybe not exactly like that, but in the same spirit. He turned, and for the first time in months, I saw something new in his eyes, a dangerous calm. They never saw us, Haley. They only saw people they could rise above. But they're still my family. Is that true? I asked, looking at him. The question hung in the air like morning fog. Before I could say anything else, my phone rang. Aaron's name was on the screen. Should I take it? Brandon asked quietly. She's different from the others, I answered softly and picked up the phone. Hi, Haley, Aaron's voice was shaking with tears. I'm so sorry too, I said, feeling something like a promise blossoming in my heart. I knew, her voice was shaking. I knew how they treated you, and I never stood up for them. I tried to remain neutral. But there's no such thing as neutrality when someone you love is suffering. I closed my eyes, and tears I hadn't expected slowly rolled down my cheeks, not because I felt pain or pity, but because there was something piercingly freeing about this farewell to the past. This whole story, woven into the fabric of my existence for years, now seemed alien, distant, almost illusory. I listened to the wind rustling the grass outside the window, to Brandon's soft footsteps on the wooden kitchen floor, and I felt not emptiness in my chest, but a fullness, the kind that can only be felt after a long, exhausting struggle, when you no longer have to prove, explain, justify yourself. I stood on the porch, watching the evening light caress the edges of the fields, and thought about how my whole life, with all its twists and turns, defeats, despair and unexpected triumphs, had led me here. Not to the pinnacle of success in the eyes of others, not to the front hall of family pride, but to a quiet, warm space where I could be myself, loved and needed. I knew now that there is a difference between those who share your last name and those who actually walk beside you, even in a storm. On Sunday evening, as the sunset slowly covered the sky with shades of peach and amber, Erin's car appeared in the yard. She came out alone, without loud words, without pretensions, without masks. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair pulled back into a careless bun, and her eyes were red, tired, but full of something real. She brought an apple pie, the same one our grandmother baked when we were children. We sat at the kitchen table, remembering how we hid from the adults in the barn, how we staged theatrical performances in the hayloft, and I caught myself thinking that maybe this was what could be saved from the ruins. "I can't change what was," she said, looking into her cup of tea. "But if you ever decide that I can be there, just there, without all this, I will. I will just be." I nodded, and that was enough. The past did not disappear, it remained like a burn mark, like an old map from which I learned to read my own direction. But it no longer defined me. It became part of a large, complex, but surprisingly integral mosaic that Brandon and I continued to assemble, from the land, from work, from quiet evenings and loud breakthroughs. We carried within us not just knowledge, not just ideas, but the possibility of change, the very same change that begins not with great speeches, but with faith in your cause, in your family, in your land. Now I knew, I was not just my parents' daughter, not just Brandon's wife, not just part of a cumbersome family drama. I was myself. The woman who stayed. Who chose. Who rejected conventions for the sake of truth. And when I lay down in bed that night, to the sounds of the night wind outside the window, pressed against the shoulder of the man with whom we created this world with our own hands, I felt how silence blossomed in my heart, not empty, but complete. I was home.